This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. In Georgia, Special Prosecutor Nathan Wate has resigned. This is following Judge Scott McAfee's ruling on District Attorney Fani Willis and their prosecution of former President Trump.
Special Prosecutor Nathan Wate submitted a letter of resignation to Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis Friday afternoon. He wrote, "I am offering my resignation in the interest of democracy, in dedication to the American public, and to move this case forward as quickly as possible." Willis accepted his resignation and applauded him for his work. She wrote, "I will always remember and will remind everyone that you were brave enough to step forward and take on the investigation and prosecution." Fulton County Superior Judge Scott McAfee ruled on Friday that either District Attorney Fani Willis or Special Prosecutor Nathan Wate must step aside from the Georgia RICO case. This means Willis can continue to prosecute former President Trump and his co-defendants as long as she removes Wade from the team. The ruling came following 2 months of speculations and court hearings into Willis's alleged affair with Wade. The judge ruled that there was not enough evidence to prove Willis's relationship with Wade amounted to a conflict of interest. But he said the relationship created, quote, "an appearance of impropriety," and described it as being the result of bad choices. McAfee also criticized how Willis testified in court. He wrote, quote, "This finding is by no means an indication that the court condones this tremendous lapse in judgment or the unprofessional manner of the district attorney's testimony during the evidentiary hearing." Much of the court hearings centered around the timeline of Willis and Wade's relationship and their motivation for the prosecution. The judge ruled that there isn't enough evidence that Willis had a personal stake in the prosecution, and he said he was unable to determine whether Willis and Wade began dating before or after he was hired as special prosecutor. He said there were reasonable questions about whether Willis and Wade testified truthfully about the timing of their relationship. An attorney for Trump said his team respects the court's decision, but believes the judge didn't go far enough. Defense attorney Steve Sadlow said, quote, "We will use all legal options available as we continue to fight to end this case, which should never have been brought in the first place." Reporting by Allison Lee, NTD News.
In New York City, former President Trump's trial in the so-called hush money case has been pushed back to mid-April. This comes after Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg said he would consider a 30-day delay. Meanwhile, Trump today railing against New York prosecutors, saying they're blocking him from accessing information about his former attorney, Michael Cohen. He's an important witness in this case. Trump's legal team had previously tried and failed to get documents directly from Cohen. After Trump's attorneys subpoenaed federal prosecutors, they complied in part, but the court denied Trump access to materials like Cohen's tax records and book publishing deals. Trump's lawyers have said they plan to challenge Cohen's credibility in court. The former president is facing 34 felony counts related to alleged hush money payments to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. He has pleaded not guilty to all charges. And former Vice President Mike Pence today saying he can't endorse Donald Trump for president. Pence added his former boss is, quote, "at odds with the conservative agenda, given his stance on abortion, U.S. national debt, and TikTok." Pence has refrained from making endorsements since he ended his 2024 presidential bid. President Biden defending Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer after he sharply criticized the Israeli leadership. It comes despite mounting Republican backlash over Schumer's comments. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
President Biden is praising leader Schumer after Schumer made a controversial speech on Thursday saying that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has, quote, "lost his way" and that Israel should hold new elections to replace him. Here's what President Biden was saying when meeting with the Irish Prime Minister at the Oval Office today. Watch.
I'm not going to elaborate on the speech. He made a good speech, and I think he expressed a serious concern shared not only by him but by many Americans.
The Israeli government has fired back against Schumer's comments, accusing him of trying to undermine a democratically elected government. And House Republicans have also called Schumer's comments
not only highly inappropriate, it's just plain wrong.
The White House, meanwhile, is being cautious today in explaining Biden's comments, saying he was referring to the passion in Schumer's speech, adding that it's up to the Israeli people to decide their leadership. Watch.
Prime Minister Netanyahu will no longer remain in power.
That's going to be up for the Israeli people to decide. For our part, we're going to keep supporting Israel in their fight against Hamas. We're going to keep urging them to reduce civilian casualties, and we're going to keep working to get a temporary ceasefire.
Meanwhile, last weekend, Biden said in an interview that while Netanyahu has a right to defend Israel against Hamas, he thinks Netanyahu was, quote, hurting Israel more than helping. That all comes as Biden's facing increasing pressure from some members of his party to call for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, and as Biden's risking losing support in November, as some voters in the Democratic primaries are voting uncommitted in protest of Biden's support for Israel. And some new tensions, despite President Biden and House Speaker Johnson looking all smiles at a St. Patrick's Day event today. Just this morning, the White House sent a letter to Speaker Johnson accusing him of trying to hurt President Biden politically and urging him to end House Republicans' impeachment inquiry into the president. And while the White House says their long investigation has failed to turn up any evidence of wrongdoing, House Speaker Johnson responded by saying that they have revealed some alarming evidence, adding that the White House does not get to decide how impeachment gets resolved. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
The Hamas terrorist group has offered Israel a new ceasefire deal to release the hostages. Meanwhile, Israel responds to more accusations of firing on people waiting for humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest on the war.
Families of the hostages in the Gaza Strip are not giving up on seeing their loved ones again. On Friday, many of them met in Tel Aviv with newfound hope after Hamas put forth a new ceasefire proposal.
Last night, Israel finally received the answer from Hamas, and that we understand that a deal is actually reachable. There's something on the table, and it's something that we've been waiting for a long time. We know that this might be the last chance to save the Israeli hostages and to bring them home alive.
But Israel rejected the proposal, saying Hamas's demands were unrealistic. Israel said it would send a delegation to Qatar for fresh talks on a hostage release deal. Secretary of State Antony Blinken addressed Hamas's new proposal.
I obviously can't get into the details of what that involves, but what I can tell you is we're working intensively with Israel, with Qatar, with Egypt, to bridge the remaining gaps and to try to reach an agreement.
Meanwhile, Israel has come under scrutiny again after the Hamas-run health ministry on Thursday accused Israeli troops of firing on crowds of people waiting for food, an incident that allegedly killed 21 people. On Friday, the IDF denied the accusations and released this video, which Israel says shows a Palestinian gunman opening fire in the midst of civilians about an hour before the humanitarian aid convoy entered the area. Also on Friday, a ship carrying 115 tons of food and water arrived in the Gaza Strip. The aid was put on trucks, and according to the IDF, it will be delivered to the northern Gaza Strip. This family is actually leaving northern Gaza because of a lack of food.
Hunger is killing us. I am moving south because everything is available in the south. I am now leaving the north because there is nothing available in terms of food and drinks.
And his wife said there is no milk available for their son.
He is not satisfied with water. There is no milk in the north. There is no juice. There is nothing. A bit of water, as you can see.
It's also the first Friday prayers during Ramadan. And in Israel, according to the religious foundation that oversees the Al-Aqsa Mosque, about 80,000 Muslim worshippers attended prayers at the mosque in the old city of Jerusalem on Friday. Jason Perry, NTD News.
There seems to be interference at Russia's polling stations as their three-day elections kick off today. Voters will be casting ballots until Sunday across 11 time zones, including annexed regions of Ukraine. No surprises are expected since Putin is running for his fifth term virtually unchallenged. His political opponents are either in jail or in exile. The most prominent of them, Alexei Navalny, died in an Arctic penal colony last month. In the district where Navalny used to live, a woman set fire to a voting booth in Moscow. In a separate case, a woman poured green dye into a ballot box, disrupting voting. Russia opened criminal cases against both women. They could face up to 5 years in jail. A Russian state-owned news agency said two similar dye incidents occurred at other polling stations. Back in the U.S., an update in the Brooklyn subway shooting yesterday that left one victim in critical condition. What appeared to be a straightforward case of self-defense could have a new twist. Authorities are now seeking a woman who could have played a role. Gunfire erupted during Thursday evening's rush hour. Panicked riders rushed off the subway as officers arrived. Investigators say the woman and a 32-year-old man got on the train and were approached by a 36-year-old man who was acting aggressively. The two men began fighting when a 36-year-old pulled out a gun. The 32-year-old grabbed the weapon and shot the other man. The suspected shooter is now in custody, and the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office had initially said he wouldn't be facing charges because he appeared to be acting in self-defense. But investigators now say the woman with the suspect allegedly stabbed the older man before he pulled out the gun. It's still unclear if the suspect will be charged. The shooting came just days after New York's governor ordered National Guard troops deployed in the city's subway system. James Crumbley was convicted yesterday by a Michigan jury after his teenage son fatally shot 4 classmates at a high school near Detroit. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the case, where Crumbley now faces time behind bars for giving his son the gun.
The manslaughter conviction comes after prosecutors argued Crumbley bore responsibility for the killings, first for giving his son the gun, and then for ignoring warning signs of violence. Crumbley was convicted on 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, one for each of the victims at Oxford High School in the 2021 shootings.
Count 1, involuntary manslaughter as to Madison Baldwin. Guilty of involuntary manslaughter as to Madison Baldwin.
We find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
The trial was carried out a month after his wife, Jennifer Crumbley, was found guilty on manslaughter charges. Both James and Jennifer Crumbley will be sentenced on April 9th. Manslaughter carries a penalty of up to 15 years in prison. They are the first U.S. parents to be charged in a school shooting committed by their child. The Crumbley son, Ethan, was 15 at the time of the shooting, involving a semi-automatic handgun. He pleaded guilty in 2022 to 4 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without parole in December. Prosecutors focused on 2 key themes at the trial: the parents' response to a morbid drawing on Ethan Crumbley's math assignment a few hours before the shooting, and the teen's access to a 9mm handgun purchased by James Crumbley only 4 days earlier. Ethan made a drawing of a gun and a wounded man on a math assignment and added the phrases, "The thoughts won't stop, help me, my life is useless." The Crumbleys declined to take Ethan home following a brief meeting at the school, and didn't inform the school about the gun they had just bought. Ethan pulled the weapon from his backpack and began shooting later that same day, killing Justin Schilling, 17, Madison Baldwin, 17, Hannah St. Juliana, 14, and Tate Meyer, 16. 6 more students and a faculty member were wounded. No one had checked the backpack, though a school administrator had joked about its heaviness. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. At least 3 people were killed and many more injured as a tornado ripped through Indiana and Ohio, leveling homes and businesses in its path. Video of the storm's aftermath on Friday shows homes destroyed and a path of debris. 3 deaths were reported in Logan County, Ohio, after the tornado touched down in a rural area in the early evening. The tornado damaged homes and businesses as it moved east through the towns of Lakeview and Midway, where first responders soon arrived to find injuries and fatalities. The storms were part of a night of violent weather that stretched from northeast Texas to Ohio. Several small towns near Winchester also suffered heavy damage from apparent tornadoes. A major storm dumped several inches of snow in Colorado, resulting in flight cancellations and the closure of a major highway. NTD's Christina Corona has more on the blizzard.
According to the National Weather Service, the storm, which began Wednesday night, delivered one of the snowiest months in Denver, which got up to about 10 inches of snow. Between 10 and 20 inches fell in the metro area and 2 to 4 feet in the foothills.
So I think March is when we receive the most snow, which is always unexpected because we're waiting for spring, but then here we are.
The storm resulted in widespread power outages, leaving over 82,000 customers without electricity. It also sustained hazardous travel conditions, prompting flight cancellations. Numerous schools and government offices were closed through Friday. A 90-mile section of Interstate 70 was closed in the mountains due to numerous reports of stranded vehicles. The interstate remained closed to commercial traffic until noon on Friday. Several ski resorts were forced to close due to the severe weather. However, many residents in Denver are finding enjoyment in the snowy conditions.
Isn't it beautiful? It covers up all the scummy parts, see? Now you've got this beautiful white snow on everything. and when I come out in the morning with something like this, I say, God, it's gorgeous, just gorgeous. It really is. I love the snow. I have no complaints. I love the snow. The other thing I don't like is the shoveling.
As the snow diminishes on Friday, lingering showers are expected to persist over the mountains. Rain and snow will continue overnight Saturday for Denver, wrapping up Sunday afternoon. Christina Corona, NTD News.
A recent report finds that Tutor.com is owned by a Hong Kong company with close ties to the Chinese Communist regime. What does this mean for data security? Joining us now is Nikki Neely, founder and president of Parents Defending Education, the organization that released the report. Nikki Neely, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you are the founder and president of Parents Defending Education. Recently, you released a report that found at least 100 school districts across the nation give students access to Tutor.com, which is owned by Primavera and has ties to the Chinese regime. Now, what are the concerns here?
Sure. I think the concerns here are much like the concerns that we've seen over TikTok. First and foremost is that the American public, families, and largely school districts are not aware that this has been purchased by a Chinese-owned company. And as the Daily Caller just released an investigation, the Primavera Holdings has very close ties to the Chinese Communist Party. And so, again, with TikTok, we have been told over and over again by their parent company, ByteDance, that information is not flowing back and forth, whereas whistleblowers in the U.S. have said, actually, maybe it is. And so I think one concern is that we don't really know what's taking place. And another concern is that Primavera Holdings actually is affiliated with ByteDance. It's kind of the parent company of that. And so if one thing is happening with TikTok, it almost certainly is happening with Tutor.com as well.
On that note, we do know that under Chinese law or under the Chinese Communist Party's law, if they ask for data from a company, the company has to hand it over. Given that, what are the dangers of these foreign-owned companies, especially when it comes to that data of our children?
Sure. I think one concern is that these school districts are collecting a vast amount of information. And so if this application is on students' iPads, students' computers, what do they have access to? Aside from the personal information, the IP addresses, just the additional data that schools are collecting on a regular basis. Parents are concerned about the surveys that are taking place, asking kids about political involvement. A lot of, DODEA, the Department of Defense Education Agency, uses Tutor.com, but as you mentioned earlier, over 100 school districts across the country are also using this. And so information about student achievement, as well as student locations and largely, personal information as well, also can be gathered and then sent back.
Given the findings of TikTok, but also now Primavera and how widespread it is, to what extent do you think we understand the Chinese Communist threat and influence in the states? Can anything be done?
I don't think anybody really has a full understanding of what's been going on. I mean, we operate on like an electoral schedule, maybe every 2 years, 4 years, whereas, we have seen the Chinese government operate on, 50-year plans. And so there is a very long-standing plan, the Belt and Road Initiative, where there's soft power. We released a report last year called Little Red Classrooms, exposing how Confucius Institutes have a K-12 corollary called Confucius Classrooms, where teachers, teaching materials, curriculum have been sent over and used by American classrooms across the country for more than a decade. And so as much as we hear educators and teachers unions in America talk about teaching true history, when we have American children learning about China from Chinese teachers, from foreign nationals, are they learning about the 3 Ts? Do they know about Tiananmen? Do they know about Tibet? So that's one aspect of it. So what are our children learning? Are they being given like a whitewashed, rosy picture of the People's Republic of China and what's taking place there? And then also, then what information is being gathered about us and will be used against us in the future? So I think there's kind of both an offensive and a defensive play here. And I think most Americans they're not aware of this at all. They think, all right, we're getting cheap goods and services without thinking, is this a hostile power, period?
Right now, we are seeing in Congress the bill to get TikTok to divest from its Chinese parent company, ByteDance, over similar concerns to this. What should be the next step when it comes to Tutor.com and the concerns around Primavera?
Sure. Well, with regards to even the Little Red Classroom study that we released last year, we contact the state superintendents in 34 states and D.C., asking them to investigate whether, what has been taking place. As we have seen concerns being raised in Congress over the past several months about malware being put on energy servers, has similar malware been put on education servers? Will those, can those utilities be shut down, or can our education system be shut down? Sadly, we have not heard much back from state superintendents, which is a subject of concern. And so this is something that we're going to continue to urge both state and federal officials to look into, to A, get a handle around the scope of this, and B, if this is truly an intelligence gathering operation, then to shut it down. Why the fact that the TikTok bill is so narrowly targeted at TikTok, I think maybe we should be looking bigger at essential companies being owned by hostile foreign countries.
Nikki Neely, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
For more on this story, including a dive into the company's ownership structure and ties to the CCP, be sure to join me for China in Focus at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Violent gangs today looting and terrorizing a hospital in Haiti. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says he expects a surge of Haitian immigrants coming to the U.S. And Florida authorities seize a migrant boat from Haiti that was transporting weapons and drugs. Here are the details.
Footage on Friday showed the aftermath of gang looting and destruction at a hospital in the embattled Haitian capital of Port-au-Prince. Around 80% of people in the nation's capital reportedly live under the rule of organized crime. On Monday, the country's prime minister announced he'll step down. On Tuesday, the U.S. State Department said members of a Haitian Transition Council would be appointed within 2 days to restore order in the country. But the process is taking longer than expected. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken on Friday said most council seats have already been appointed.
There are a couple that still haven't, so that's a work in progress, but we've seen that move forward.
And in related news, a dangerous interception off the coast of Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis today announced that state authorities stopped a migrant boat from Haiti. He gave details on the items they found on the boat.
25 illegal immigrants, potential illegal immigrants from Haiti. In their boat, in their vessel, they had firearms, they had drugs, they had night vision gear, and were boating very recklessly, which would potentially endanger other folks.
DeSantis says the individuals were turned over to the Coast Guard for deportation. He added that the incident took place a few weeks ago and that more details will be released soon. Earlier this week, DeSantis announced an increase of personnel and aircraft on the Florida coast. He said he expected more Haitians would soon travel by boat to Florida because it's the quickest way to the U.S. But on Friday, he said they might actually choose a different route, now that Florida has increased border security off its coast.
Haitians can get to the United States easier by flying to Mexico and walking across the border. They're probably going to go to Mexico and then come in through the border, knowing that Biden will just let everybody in.
And finally, this Haitian immigrant has pleaded not guilty after being charged with raping a disabled teenage girl in a Massachusetts migrant shelter. Fox News now reports that the immigrant was allowed into the U.S. through a controversial parole program. It allows up to 30,000 immigrants a month to fly into the country. The suspect is set to appear in court next week.
Earlier today, we spoke to Josh Hammer about the judge's ruling on District Attorney Fani Willis. Hammer is senior editor at large for Newsweek and host of America on Trial. He's also an attorney and legal scholar. Josh Hammer, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Now, Judge Scott McAfee has ruled that District Attorney Fani Willis can continue to prosecute the 2020 election interference case if Special Prosecutor Nathan Wate is removed. What does this mean for Trump's case in Georgia?
You know, it's really interesting. I mean, this whole saga has been absolutely fascinating for the past roughly 2 months or so. So one of the key arguments that Trump and his co-defendants lawyers and Fani Willis's lawyers, one of the key parts that they were disputing was what the legal standard should be to require a district attorney's recusal. And what Trump's lawyers were arguing was that it would even just be the appearance of corruption, the appearance of a conflict of interest. On the contrary, you had Fani Willis and Nathan Wade's lawyers who said, no, you actually need to demonstrate an actual conflict of interest, not a mere appearance. Based on my reading of the opinion this morning, it seems like Judge McAfee actually agreed with Trump's attorneys. He actually said that a mere appearance of a conflict of interest is sufficient under Georgia law to either justify or outright mandate a district attorney's recusal from a case. However, rather than just do the natural thing and then say, okay, once I establish this, I'm going to go ahead and recuse you, he basically tried to appease all sides. I'm not sure if that's going to hold up. I mean, Trump's going to be able to appeal this thing to the Georgia Court of Appeals. Ultimately, it probably will go to the Georgia Supreme Court. Now, the silver lining for Trump is twofold. One is that it looks like Fani Willis, you know, the world saw what she is. That evidentiary hearing, her infamous testimony on the witness stand, that's probably going to taint a jury pool. So that's good news for Trump. Furthermore, the timeline here is getting us very, very, very close at this point to the November election, and it's only going to get delayed more. As I was saying, he's going to appeal this thing to the Georgia Court of Appeals. So long story short, not an ideal day for Trump, but it's actually not the end of the world either.
Legal analyst Jonathan Turley is also weighing in. He is saying that in some ways it is a result that should please no one other than Donald Trump, adding the defense removed the lead special prosecutor while leaving Willis carrying more baggage than Amtrak. What do you make of his assessment here?
Yeah, look, Fani and Nathan have a lot of baggage. I mean, like, that is clearly not much of an exaggeration from Jonathan Turley. The factual details are very, very shady. I mean, you had the idea that Nathan Wade is taking her on these big cruise ships, and then she's paying him back in cash because she said that her daddy told her to store cash in the household when she was growing up. And then you had this investigator, this geolocation kind of cell service fancy investigator that Trump's lawyers had retained. And a couple weeks ago, we saw the results of his investigation where he saw that there were literally thousands and thousands of interactions between Fani and Nathan in the year leading up to the November 2021 commencement of her prosecution. In other words, they were sleeping at each other's house before this investigation even launched. So it looks really bad. I mean, it looks very, very bad for Fani Willis. And again, I do think that's going to taint a potential future jury pool, which is probably one of the many reasons that Judge McAfee should have just disqualified her and kicked this thing out of Fulton County, Georgia in the first place.
Josh Hammer, thank you so much for your time.
You bet. Thank you.
And we have some breaking news. Former Trump advisor Peter Navarro is asking the Supreme Court to intervene in his case involving contempt of Congress. Navarro was sentenced to 4 months in prison for defying a congressional subpoena. He's required to report to a prison in Miami by Tuesday, March 19th. Navarro's lawyers filed an emergency application with the Supreme Court this afternoon, asking the court to keep Navarro out of prison. Earlier this week, a federal appeals court rejected Navarro's appeal of the prison sentence. The Supreme Court issues an important ruling on free speech on whether government officials can ban citizens on their social media, a controversial topic ever since former President Trump blocked critics on Twitter. NTD's Virginia Gibson has more.
The Supreme Court decides if government officials ban citizens from commenting on their social media posts that may not necessarily violate the First Amendment, the right to free speech. The issue garnered national attention in 2021 when then-President Trump banned critics on Twitter, now called X. The First Amendment stops government actors from blocking free speech. It doesn't apply to private citizens. Private citizens can freely ban whomever they want. The court decided that government officials are also private citizens at the same time. They have the right to run private social media accounts and post about their work. If the posts aren't part of their official duties, they would not be speaking on behalf of the government and may have the right to ban social media users.
Scenarios like this turn on the very fact-specific analysis, which means that we really have to look at every case separately.
Attorney Nicole Bernecki says it may be unclear whether an official's post is personal or was made on behalf of the government. Courts may have to analyze the content and function of a post to determine this.
That also should become a lesson to public officials, just to make sure that if they post something, they clearly have separate profiles, one for personal content and one for official content.
The lower courts will now use the Supreme Court's new standard to determine cases. It's still unclear whether the President of the United States has a right to ban social media users. Virginia Gibson, NTD News.
The annual House Republican Issues Conference concluded today at the Greenbrier Resort in West Virginia. GOP leaders expressed hope that the conference fostered enough unity ahead of a budget battle and a general election. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez summarizes the highlights.
House Republican Conference Chair Elise Stefanik began the three-day retreat addressing the urgent need for consensus among Republican lawmakers.
This is an opportunity for House Republican members to continue our planning and work for our legislative agenda for the House Republican majority, especially as we head into a historic November election.
Let's remember that since becoming Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson has lost the support of his conference on at least 5 votes. The Speaker made it clear that he was aware of how fractious his conference is and asked his colleagues to measure their policy demands.
This isn't a time of divided government and a time of this, literally the slimmest margin in U.S. history. It's not the time for long Hail Mary passes on every play, but it's 3 yards in a cloud of dust.
House Republicans are preparing to present a second batch of 6 appropriation bills in order to get government funded through fiscal year 2024. Congresswoman Lisa McClain, the House Republican Conference Secretary, believes that they can get these past the House floor before the March 22nd deadline and thus avoid a partial government shutdown.
I think it's going to be ugly. I think it's going to be messy, and I think there are going to be a lot of fights in the trenches. It won't be perfect. We won't get as many wins as I would like to get, and probably the rest of our conference would like to get, but we will get some wins.
Approximately half of the House Republican Conference did not attend the 3-day retreat. Freedom Caucus members, for example, expressed their opposition to the minibus appropriation process and insisted on 12 separate bills to be presented on the House floor. House GOP leadership insisted on their football analogies and defended their strategies.
People will say, I know, but you only split it up into 2. You're right, but that's progress, right? Every time you get the ball on the football field, you don't score a touchdown, but your goal is to get a first down.
Congress must approve the second batch of 6 appropriation bills before next Friday in order to avoid a partial government shutdown. Reporting from White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
A Trump and Biden repeat is in the works. Take a deep dive into the election's most pressing issues with Steve Lance and myself as ballots are cast across the country for their nominee on March 19th. Catch all the action and results live at 7:30 p.m. Eastern next Tuesday. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Soon you'll no longer be able to get a ride with Uber or Lyft in Minneapolis. The 2 ride-sharing apps will stop operations in the city beginning May 1st. This after the City Council approved a minimum wage law. The council voted to mandate a minimum wage of $15.57 an hour for rideshare drivers in the city. In doing so, the council overrode Mayor Jacob Fry's veto. Uber is responding to the new law, saying, "We are disappointed the council chose to ignore the data and kick Uber out, putting 10,000 people out of work and leaving many stranded." Lyft calls the bill deeply flawed and says it hopes to return to Minneapolis as it advocates for a statewide solution in Minnesota. The Minneapolis mayor is imploring local politicians to come up with a solution before May 1st. And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty of sports news going on. Let's start in college sports, where 16 female athletes are suing the NCAA after allowing transgender swimmer Lia Thomas to compete at the 2022 National Championships. What is the basis for their lawsuit?
Yeah, their argument is that their Title IX rights were violated when the NCAA let Thomas compete against them. Now, Thomas won the 500-yard freestyle event while beating out 3 female Olympic medalists in the process for the title. Now, it should be noted that Thomas, this was Will Thomas in the men's division, was ranked somewhere in the 500s. When Will Thomas started identifying as female, Lia Thomas, and started competing in the women's division, that ranking jumped all the way to first. I think that's very relevant here. Now, we actually heard from one of the plaintiffs, former NCAA swimmer Caitlin Wheeler, earlier today regarding this lawsuit. Here was her thoughts on it.
It's crazy that we're having to even file a lawsuit when something would take a mere second and apply common sense to solve. And so the reason for the lawsuit, well, the NCAA's most basic job is to protect the fairness and safety of competition in collegiate sports. And it is failing to do that. It continues to fail at that simple task. And so the NCAA really is actively and openly discriminating against women on the basis of our sex, which we all know is in direct violation of Title IX.
Now, one of the plaintiffs, Riley Gaines, has actually testified before on Capitol Hill about not only having to compete against Thomas, but also being forced to change in the same locker room. Does that play into the lawsuit?
Well, I mean, it's definitely mentioned in there. You know, like you said, Gaines testified on this before on Capitol Hill. She did so in tears. It was very sad. She said they were not asked their consent. They were not forewarned. It was a very uncomfortable situation. Now, Caitlin Wheeler was also in that same locker room. She discussed that with us as well. Here was her thoughts on that.
But what we didn't expect was to be fully undressed, putting on our racing suits, and turning around and seeing a man standing a mere 10 feet from you, changing and exposing himself. Nothing could have prepared me for that. It was shocking. It was humiliating. It was disheartening. But really, most of all, I felt betrayed. Betrayed by an organization that I had up until that moment truly trusted that they had our best interests at heart.
Now, Wheeler also noted that this took place at the 2022 National Championships, so nearly 2 years ago. They purposely gave the NCAA some time to evaluate their policies, especially now they have a new president, Charlie Baker. But unfortunately, nothing has happened, so that is why the timing of the lawsuit is as it is.
Well, switching gears a bit here to baseball, Dodgers superstar Shohei Ohtani recently announced that he got married during the offseason, though he declined any specifics other than to say that she was a normal Japanese woman. What is the latest on this?
Well, now we have a name, Mamiko Tanaka, and she's actually a professional basketball player in Japan, so really not normal. Now you can see her real quick here walking a little behind Ohtani coming through the airport in Korea. Now Ohtani, by the way, is probably the most famous person in Japan, so this is a huge deal there. Now the Dodgers will open the season with a series in Korea starting next week. Not only will it be Ohtani's debut with his new team, they also signed a Japanese pitcher, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, to a $325 million contract. There's Yamamoto right there. That $325 million somehow compels in comparison to the $700 million Ohtani got. And even though Ohtani's arm injury will keep him from pitching this season, the Dodgers still look like the team to beat.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
A generation of children who learn from illuminated screens are now going old school. Starting this year, California grade school students are required to learn cursive handwriting. Here's more.
There you go.
Cursive is making a comeback in California.
Awesome.
In an era of computers and tablets, the skill has fallen out of fashion. But a new state law requires students to learn the old school style of handwriting.
Is there any trouble that you're having with any of them?
By the time they leave the 6th grade.
Yes, I love it. It's just fancy how to write, and it's just like fun to learn, like new letters.
During cursive, erasers are best friend.
At Orangethorpe Elementary School in Fullerton, California, Students are practicing the flowy penmanship. Sixth grader Milo Chang says he thinks cursive is stretching his abilities.
And I really think it helps like my handwriting too, just like print, because if you're writing something, if you're doing something harder, basically if you're doing an easier version of that, you'll probably get better at the easier version too.
The new law was sponsored by California Assembly member Sharon Quirk Silva, a former elementary school teacher who said she was inspired to introduce the bill after a chance encounter with former Governor Jerry Brown in 2016.
Jerry Brown was the governor and invited a group of us to dinner. I happened to sit right next to him, and he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a teacher for elementary." And he said, "Right away, you need to bring back cursive writing."
Ready? Dead. Hand.
The bill turned law requires handwriting instruction for grades 1 through 6, including cursive in the appropriate grade levels, generally considered to be the 3rd grade and above. California's Common Core standards did technically still have cursive writing goals, but Quirk Silva said instruction was patchy.
The hope of the legislation is that by the time students leave 6th grade, they would be able to read and write it.
This, what do you think letter is that? Letter?
W.
Orangethorpe Elementary School teacher Pamela Keller says some of her students still need convincing.
A lot of my students will say, oh, it's too hard to write in cursive. And so we tell them, well, it's going to make you smarter. It's going to make some connections in your brain. It's going to help you move to the next level. And then just do it really light. And then they get excited because students want to be smarter, they want to learn, they want to be the top dog in the class. And so I think that's really exciting for them. I'm holding it gently and I'm letting it flow over the paper.
Experts say learning cursive boosts cognitive development, reading comprehension, and fine motor skills.
You're using different neural networks when you're doing cursive rather than printing.
Leslie Zaroya says learning cursive provides childhood development benefits.
As you're creating the letter, you're thinking about what is the sound that that letter makes and how does it connect to the next letter and what are those two sounds together.
Educators also say cursive can unlock a doorway to the past, giving students the ability to examine generations-old family letters or important historic documents.
We have, I told you, the Constitution in our library. It's handwritten in cursive. So if you can't read those pieces of history without somebody translating it for you, I find that to be kind of sad too. So I just want my students to have that choice, to be able to open up that world for them.
And that's all for today's news. For more coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.